Hello and welcome to the third installment of our Aurelian video. First, I'd like to thank you for your kind comments both on the YouTube channel and in the different forums. Now that we have discussed the setup procedure, it's time to see some action. In this video, we start the battle proper and see how the Romans try to capture their objective marker. For this we are going to use the quick reference sheet that Sam offers as a free download on the Honor website. In the right upper corner you can see the sequence of play, which is first the event phase, then the rally phase, shooting, movement, combat, and lastly the status phase. These phases make up a single turn. Each player plays his turn, then the other player plays his turn, and so on. In the ambush scenario, the advantage side gets the first turn, so in this case the Roman player. The general idea of the Roman player is to soften up the German optimates, which defend the objective marker in the center, by a barrage of missiles, both from the artillery, which is especially deadly, and from the bowmen. They're going to just hold the right flank, and on the left flank they are trying to achieve something with their cavalry, and maybe it is even possible to make a breakthrough and get into the back of the German army. Let's have a look at the Roman hand. In the first phase we are searching for the letter of E, which is an event and which can be played at the start of each turn. As luck has it, all our Roman cards are event cards, so we are really spoiled with choice here. There are two cards that are especially helpful. First, Occasio. Occasio is a card that allows you to retrieve some of the cards that you have removed from the game. This card is really very valuable and, I would even say it is the most valuable card in the game. So be very careful how you use it, because if you use it in combat for the laurel value and you lose this card, you at the same time lose another 6 cards. If I get this card, I just put it to the side and store it for later careful use. Another very helpful card is Restitutio. This allows to rally your units without removing cards but only discarding them. You will understand this later, and this is another card which is very helpful to save for later. Just remember, if you put aside cards for later use, you still have to count them to your hand. As the Roman player has 8 cards in his hand, the hand stays large enough if you remove some cards from it or for later use, but the German player will really have a problem there. We won't go through all the event cards, but what we are going to use is Expeditus. This means that the Roman player can move through difficult terrain as if it were open terrain. And remember, we have a few units in bad ground, so maybe it is best to move them out as soon as possible, and this will be achieved with this card. So we are going to play this event and lay it aside in order to remember that this event is in play. Now the next phase is the rally phase. We don't have to rally at the moment because there was no combat before, so we are just moving on to shooting, and this is now where the combat begins. The importance of shooting differs from army to army. In my army choice, I have given shooting quite a dominance. In order to see whether we can shoot or not, we have to draw a line from the center point of your unit to your opponent. For that, we are going to use the measuring tool that you can also download on the Honor website. Here you can see that it is no problem at all for the auxiliary archer to shoot at any of the optimates units. The target has to be in a 45-degree angle and has to be in range. For light troops, the range is 4 BWs. For massed troops, like these archers, it is 6 BWs. If you use the unit tiles, you will find a red bow symbol for them in order to show their special shooting capacity. Shooting in Aurelian is quite straightforward. That is because shooting in ancient times wasn't normally to right away destroy a unit, but just to disrupt it. And if you shoot at a unit, you almost always are achieving some effect, even if it is just to cause fear and disorientation. That is why in Aurelian, if you keep all the factors in mind, you can be sure that your shooting will achieve its aim. Of course, the first thing that we have to consider is the aspect of cover and difficult terrain. The bowman himself is in difficult terrain, but if you look closely you can see that the center point of the unit is not. So for the shooting, his own difficult terrain is not counted as cover. However, his opponent, the optimates units, are all behind barricades. Let us now calculate the scores. The shooter starts with a +1 because he has a red bow trait. The optimates has also a score of +1 because they have a shield trait, and in addition they have a barricade, so shooting is obstructed. They have a +2. If the bowman plays a laurel card that is now higher than the score of the optimates unit, then his shooting succeeds. He has a +1, the optimates have a +2, so he has at least to play a laurel card with a 2 on it. He lies it down, and at this moment the shooting will succeed. The optimates unit gets its first disruption, which I'm going to mark by a little red bubble on a pointy stick that I've applied to the back of the bases, so it is now disrupted. This was to show you how shooting works. Normally, shooting is done simultaneously, not for just one unit, but for all units that are going to shoot, and you have to lay down all the cards you want to play. Our light units on the right can shoot because they have a black bow symbol. However, their possible objectives are in the woods, and if you lay down the ruler, you can only shoot as far in the woods as is the first marking on the ruler. So they can only shoot up to here, so they can't shoot. What they can do is they can also shoot on the optimates, because they are in a 45-degree angle from their position. The right unit has already been shot at. They could have supported this shooting and add another +1 to the score, but they can also, now that this shooting is resolved, shoot on the other optimates unit, which they will do. They have only a black bow, so they start with a score of 0, and as we have seen, the optimates has a score of 2. So they have to play at least a card with 3 laurels on them. The choosing of the cards is now a strategic decision, because you can choose the card and play the card for its laurels value, but at the same time you will lose the opportunity to play it as an event or an interrupt, or to use it for rally. So you really have to decide what you want to do. At the beginning of the game, in your first game, this will take quite some time, but the more often you play the game, the better you know your cards, and the less time this process will consume. The most important unit for the shooting is of course the artillery. The artillery grants the unit that it is with a red bow symbol, with the special addition that this shooting causes not one disruption but two. So this is very helpful to soften up the optimates. It is going to fire at the last optimates unit that has not been shot at, and this shooting will be supported by the light infantry unit that we have here that can also reach this optimates unit. To calculate the score, we have a red bow starting with a +1, then the shooting is aided, which makes +2. The optimates have cover and they have their shield, so they are at a +2 also. We only need a laurel card of 1 in order to make the shooting succeed. Now shooting is resolved. We've already calculated the shooting scores and we are going to reveal the cards, and we are also going to place now the disruptions on the back of the optimates units. Shooting, like everything you do in Aurelian, consumes cards. The card with the biggest laurel value on it is not discarded but removed. The 4 that we have played is now going to wander to the removed pile and the other cards to the discarded pile. This is the first glimpse that we have on the army moral system of Aurelian. Everything you do, may it be shooting, may it be fighting in close combat, or may it be rallying troops, consumes cards. And these cards will be lost forever. Well, there are, as I already said with Ocasio and if you remember from our last installment, the logistics officer, some possibilities of regaining some of these removed cards. However, most of the cards are gone. And as soon as you lose all your cards, you have lost the game. So card management is very important. The central idea behind that is that an army as a whole has a stamina, a fighting value, and this stamina decreases with the action that it undertakes. If it just sits and waits for the opponent actions, it saves its strength. But if it shoots and fights and rallies, the fighting value and the stamina wears down. The effect of this is achieved by the card loss. And since you're always losing the card with the highest laurel value, the longer the game takes, the fewer of the high laurel values you will have. And this is a very interesting effect that I really love about the game. Because if you play any other game, the chance of rolling 6s is quite the same at the beginning of the game or at the end of the game, no matter how much the army has fought. With Aurelian, the good value cards are going to leave you. So later in the game, the fighting power has decreased, and you can see that. The troops are tired and they are exhausted and they are thirsty and they are wounded and they are disrupted by shooting and everything. And in these circumstances, naturally, the army doesn't fight as good as it has at the beginning of the battle, so the beginning of the game. A really interesting effect that makes Aurelian really stand out from all the other games around. The next phase is phase 4, the movement phase. And as you may remember, we have played an event at the beginning of our turn. This means that all your units can move through difficult terrain as if it were open. For the movement allowance of the units, I want to refer back to the unit tiles. Here is the movement allowance, so you can see that this unit can move 3 BWs in good terrain and 2 in bad terrain, and massed units like this legionary unit can move 2 BWs in open terrain and 1 BW in difficult terrain. If you're doing a difficult movement like full about face, then you're also going to use the second number. In movement, we can either move units or forces. Forces are units of the same type grouped together in the same type of affecting terrain. So, for example, you could move all mass units or all light units in the same affecting terrain together as long as they are not more than 1 BW apart from each other. So to move the two bowmen on the right, we can use one movement allowance. To move the legionaries and the archers, which are all massed in the center, we can use another one. How many movements you're allowed to take also depends on the Lawrence value on the card you play. And this card cannot be drawn. It has to be played from your hand. So when shooting and rallying in the previous phases of your turn, you also have to keep in mind that you will use one card for the movement, and if you don't save this up, you won't be able to do any movement. We have a card of a Laurel's value of 5, so it won't be possible to move everything, but we can achieve quite a lot with it. First, the light troops on the right. The movement is done also using the ruler, and a simple move consists in first a slight wheel up to 45 degrees and then the movement. After the movement is done, the unit cannot wheel anymore, so it is pointing into that direction that it was when the movement ended. There's no need to wheel here. We're just going to move these units straight ahead, and we could even go into combat with the German units, which is what we will do right away. The situation on this flank is not going to improve, so just use what we have at the moment. Now that our first move is done, which is called the first march is done, we can consider the situation in the center. There it would be quite helpful to move out the legionaries from the bad terrain. But massed units that have shot cannot move. So both the bowmen and the legionaries that have shot with the artillery are now stuck. We can move through them with the other legionary unit, but this will cause a disruption, and at the moment the Roman player decided not to do that. Our left flank. The light troops, the light cavalry troops, have a movement allowance of 4 BWs, and we're going to use it. 1, 2, 3, 4, bringing them right to the side of the hill. The last one is going to wheel a little bit before moving in order to bring it into a line with the other ones. We can do that using the same march, because it doesn't matter where the units are going to be able to use them as a force. It is just how they start the turn. Now we are going to use a little instrument that we've designed during playtest. It is 1 BW in length and has a 45-degree angle to it. So of course you can wheel using the ruler, but in my opinion it is easier with this little instrument. You just keep it fixed and wheel your unit around it. So you make sure that it hasn't wheeled more than 45 degrees and that it does not do a difficult movement. After the initial wheel follows the movement of 4 BWs. This was our second march spent. Our third march is going to be spent on the waiting heavy cavalry. Here also we are going to wheel first and then we move. In good terrain they also have a movement allowance of 4 BWs. With our remaining moves, we are first going to activate our reserve. With our last remaining movement, we can optimize the situation on the left with just a little wheel before, because then he will be able to support the fighting. The movement card is discarded and then we're going to see combat. It may seem quite peculiar to you to have a combat in the very first turn of the game. This of course depends on how you deploy your armies. In this case, in the ambush scenario, the Roman player wanted to force the battle, and so all maneuvering was done before the game, and actually the game starts with the clash of the armies. You can do that in your games as you please. You can deploy your armies to the back of the table, but in this case I wanted to show you everything in a nutshell. Now the first combat is going to be between the light troops on the right. To make it a little bit easier for you to remember all the factors, I have now put the unit tiles in front of the units. We have light troops on both sides and they have the same fighting value of 1. Massed troops would fight at a disadvantage in bad terrain, but since they are light troops, they don't get anything, any subtraction here. So they are both fighting 1 to 1, and it now depends on the cards that you set aside for them. It may look strange for you first that you can choose the cards out of your hand, but just remember that these cards are used for several different things, and that you won't have the opportunity and possibility to always choose the right cards. The idea is that you can influence some of the combats with a sort of management attention you give them, like the presence of a leader, but you cannot influence all. And since your opponent has the same opportunity and possibility to influence the battle, the difference isn't as great as it may seem at the beginning. So here, for example, the Roman player has only left 1 card that he can spend for this combat. For the other combat, he has to draw a card from his deck. Now the German player can choose from his cards the cards with the best laurel values. However, he really has to consider if he wants to do that. Because if he uses cards with big laurels, they will be lost after this combat. And, well, these are just light troops, and the German player really has to think about if he wants to lose his best cards for this combat. So he places rather mediocre cards, and, well, we're going to see what happens. After all combats on the game table are supported with cards, all cards are revealed at the same time. Now, for the first combat, both units have a fighting value of 1, and we have both 4 laurel cards. So, this means a draw. In the case of the draw, the attacker has to withdraw 1 BW. Also, in addition, both units have fought, and so both units will get a disruption. A light unit can suffer 3 disruptions, and the 4th one will break it. A massed unit can suffer 4 disruption, and the 5th one will break it. Now, the next battle, there we also have a retreat for the Roman, this time because he has a 1, a 4, and the German has a 1, a 5. So 4 to 5, the Roman player retreats. Having fought, the German player gets a disruption. But the Roman player gets a disruption for the difference between the scores. The German player has a 5, he has a 4, so he gets a difference of 1. So you can see there's not much difference in a draw or a withdrawal with a very slight difference in the fighting scores. This will be something completely different with an increase of the difference between the fighting scores, but more to that later. Please note that now both sides will remove the card with the highest value. So in both cases are 4 laurel cards. The other 2 cards are simply discarded. This concludes the first turn for the Roman player, and the next step is the status phase. No matter what it has done during the game, in the status phase each army loses 1 card for fatigue. So the stamina decreases, as I've explained before. The Roman player doesn't have any cards left on his hand that he wants to spend. He actually has put 2 cards aside, but he wants to keep them, and so he draws a card and removes it. It is very important to see that you didn't have the opportunity to look at it, though this can be a very good card like Ocasio. A mechanism like that reduces the predictability of the game, because you of course know after playing for several times what cards you have in store, but since you don't always know which card leaves the game, you don't know for sure if you have the opportunity for the card you're waiting for. So for example, if you're going to lose the Ocasio card, you won't be able to retrieve 6 cards, and this will really dampen the stamina of your army. This effect represents aspects that a general cannot foresee. He can plan in advance, but there's also the fog of war, and this fog of war is represented both by this effect and the possibility of playing interrupts by the opposing player. Now this concludes the turn, and normally we would have to check for victory, but in the first turn this is not a necessity, so let's move on to the German player and his first turn.